Hello everyone. For those of you not in the UK or not aware of current goings on in the UK at the moment, recently there was a suspected murder in London of Sarah Everard, whose remains were found in Kent, and the current prime suspect who is currently arrested is a Metropolitan Police officer. And for those of you that don't know, a Metropolitan Police officer is essentially a police officer who works in London. Now, that is obviously a very short summary of the events going on as we know it now. But I'm not really here to talk about the event of the suspected murder. I believe a good friend of the channel, the Teabag Who Laughs, is planning to make a video as part of his true crime documentary series to talk about all the details that we know of the Sarah Everard case. I suggest you subscribe to him, watch his backlog of true crime stuff if that interests you, and wait for him to publish the event of Sarah Everard, as I want to talk a bit more about the reaction to this. So, for those of you that don't know, last Saturday, on the 13th of March, there was a vigil in Clapham Common for the memorial of Sarah Everard, who, to be fair, appears to have been completely innocent and yet allegedly murdered while walking home from her friend's house. And it has been a common complaint of women in general for years that they do not feel safe walking alone on the streets, which I can completely understand. There is a lot of potential for wrongdoing to be done in the dark. However, it does need to be pointed out that these events are overwhelmingly rare. That is why there has been wall-to-wall coverage of this particular event in recent days. But that doesn't mean that crazy feminists won't get out on the street and act like crazy feminists. So here are a few clips of that particular vigil. Yes, loudly shouting and screaming, while all having your phones out to turn your flashlights on, makes it look more of a concert than a vigil that is supposed to be humble and sombre. If you were really there for a vigil to memorialise an innocent woman who was allegedly murdered, I suggest you act a lot more like this real queen. That was Kate Middleton. No messing about, no shouting and screaming for change, just turning up at the memorial at Clapham Common to pay her respects. And this is exactly how I think you should act, not like a bunch of screaming harpies. And of course, this is a protest being done while we are still in a lockdown. This is technically an illegal protest because it does not comply with the current lockdown rules. So due to this, the police had to start arresting people, and that went about as well as you'd expect. Now, to make it clear on my position about this, the ideal position that I would have is that yes, these women should be perfectly within their rights to protest as they are, whether what I think they are after is insane or not, and we will get into what they are after. However, we don't live in my ideal world. We live in a world where we currently have lockdown restrictions that I do not currently agree with. However, while we do have these restrictions, I would at the very least like the laws to actually be enforced fairly. And if we remember back to the Black Lives Matter protests in the second lockdown in the UK, they were by no means enforcing the law then. However, a week after, there were protests for people who were in favour of keeping statues and wanting to protect them. And lo and behold, the police actually start enforcing the law on those people. And so I will at the very least say at least the police are trying to enforce the law here. There does seem to be some sort of equality under the law, which is exactly what I'm after. When it comes to actual laws, I think that's a different issue. So I will at the very least give the police that. They are applying the law where I think it should be applied. But again, I wish the law didn't exist. And yet obviously the protesters were not too happy that the law-breaking leaders of this protest were being arrested for breaking the law. So eventually, for some reason, they moved to the statue of Churchill, which I would like to point out is over an hour's walk from Clapham Common, so I'm not too sure why they ended up there. Maybe there were two different protests. But either way, here is a clip of the scenes from the Winston Churchill statue that the police were trying to protect. And they just keep on repeating. But I do want you to keep in mind that these people, who are quite clearly here for the memory, we'll say, of Sarah Everard, are saying all cops are bastards. Just remember, they think all cops are bastards. And while they are shouting all cops are bastards, they also want more protections for women in areas where they think women are most vulnerable. So we'll get into an article now. Plain clothes police will patrol bars and clubs to protect women. So all cops are bastards, aka all police are bastards. Plain clothes bastards will patrol bars and clubs to protect women. And this is exactly what they were asking for, so it's a bit confusing that they'd say the people literally trying to protect them are bastards, but you know, logic doesn't really fit in to the leftist worldview, whether it be feminist or critical race theory. Bars and clubs will be patrolled by plainclothes police officers at night to protect women from sexual harassment and assault. And I'm sure bars and clubs are a rather bad area for women to suffer sexual harassment and assault. I have seen it firsthand in plenty of them. Boris Johnson announced measures last night in an attempt to reassure women after the killing of Sarah Everard. Pilot schemes will be run across the country with more patrols to identify predatory and suspicious offenders. The government is doubling a fund that provides deterrence such as better lighting and CCTV to 45 million, so we'll have more Big Brother is watching you cameras around Britain. Isn't that lovely? The better lighting though is fine, I don't mind that. Johnson said that Everard case had unleashed a wave of feeling about women not feeling safe, adding, "We must drive out violence against women and girls and make every part of the criminal justice system work to better protect and defend them." And again, as I pointed out in the last video, after Jess Phillips was announcing the names of all women who died from a male perpetrator and it took 4 minutes, if she did the same thing with men who were murdered by men, it would take her 12. But again, no, let's just think about the woman. After a single woman has died walking her way home, which she absolutely doesn't deserve. But we've also had constant news of knife crime going on in London, where people are homicided constantly, usually men by men. And yet from what I have seen in the news, we haven't had anywhere near £45 million going towards doing anything about that. So forgive my cynicism, but I can't see this as anything other than a knee-jerk. However, I don't think it's all bad news here. Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, said he felt very personally and very piercingly that the streets needed to be safer. That is why we are increasing the number of police by 20,000, he told Sky News. Now, I do hope these are officers who will be on the beat and on the street, actually being a deterrent to crime, rather than people sitting behind a desk seeing if Count Dankula's putting out any more edgy memes. We have heard new measures to make the streets safer with CCTV and lighting overnight. Again, we have got 2 bits of legislation going through the House of Commons to increase the sentencing, but clearly we have got more to do. So, as I say, it does seem like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, and it does seem to just be there to appease these crazy feminists. But it is strange, because there is absolutely no one out there saying that Sarah Everard deserved this, because she absolutely did not. Pretty much everyone out there thinks that the state should be there to protect our rights, and believe it or not, being abducted at night and murdered is an infringement on your rights. So it's almost like they are screaming at an invisible enemy, shouting all cops are bastards, when it was one policeman that is suspected of the abduction and murder. So again, it is obviously ridiculous to shout all cops are bastards, and then at the same time be happy that your bars and clubs will be filled with plainclothes police officers, who are apparently bastards. So this article also goes into the group that organised the vigil, and they sound absolutely atrocious. Sisters Uncut was formed in 2014 as a loosely organised grassroots collective of feminists and gained prominence at the vigil in memory of Sarah Everard at the weekend in Clapham, South London, after the original organisers reclaimed these streets had pulled out. It is known for its direct action, which, if you listen to John McDonnell, the ex-Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, would say just means insurrection. In 2018, the group stormed the BAFTA's red carpet in protest against Theresa May's domestic violence policies. Odd place to protest for it. In 2015, they dyed the fountains in Trafalgar Square red to symbolise the blood of women murdered by their partners. Okay. It is inclusive towards all women, including trans and intersex, but is not open to people who identify solely or primarily as men. Okay. This weekend, it attracted controversy for listing 194 women killed by police officers in prison or in state custody. I don't know if that means of all time or in the past decade or past year or week. I don't know what that means. But without caveats, such as trans prisoners who had raped a schoolgirl. So, basically, they are very selective, seem to hate cops and men. So in short, they seem like your standard feminists of 2016. Who I thought were all gone, but apparently were just hibernating, waiting for years to finally have something to protest about. Just shows you how rare these things are, and how much society doesn't like them. And just quickly, I want to read the part of the Times where they dunk a bit on Jess Phillips. So, in the furious debate around the murder of Sarah Everard, Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, argued that crimes against women were not treated seriously, and the convictions for fly tipping attracted longer jail terms than those for stalking. This is a slight exaggeration. Fly tipping usually results in fines up to £50,000 if the offences are dealt with in the magistrate's court. Magistrates can also hand down jail terms of up to 12 months, and serious cases in the Crown Court can result in a maximum stint in prison of 5 years. But in 2017, the government legislated to double the maximum jail sentence for stalking from 5 years to 10 years. So not only was it a slight exaggeration, it was just an outright lie. By Jess Phillips of all people, can you believe that? Anyway, unfortunately that's not the only things we have to go through for now. Sarah Everard, give boys lessons on how to respect women and girls, says Minister. Yes, if men are lacking one thing in society today, it's that they lack respect for women and girls, and that is why they are murdering them. Yes, I'm completely convinced. Boys should be taught how to respect women and girls in the streets as part of their sex and reproduction education at school, the policing minister has said. Kit Malthouse made the suggestion in response to the public clamour for action after Sarah Everard's murder. He said that all adults have a duty to pay attention to the way we bring up our kids and being role models by helping boys to understand relationships with women. Okay. However, in an interview with The Times, Malthouse also suggested that teachers could play a role in changing attitudes towards the way in which women are treated in public, included the subject as part of relationships and sex education. So here's the thing, one, you just kind of develop respect for women anyway, or at least I did, and number two, we do have these classes at school, at least we did in my school, called PHSE, which stands for Personal, Social, Health and Economic Education. I think that means economic as in home life rather than economics in general. It's basically a lesson in how to grow up and not be a complete twat. And I remember that we were basically told this, that you shouldn't harass women in the streets, and that it is bad if we have a society that thinks it is okay to have inappropriate comments said to women that make them uncomfortable on the street. And the examples we were given at school, from what I remember, were quite openly sexual and definitely should not be said on the streets. The problem is now is that street harassment is an umbrella term for anything from telling a woman that she should smile more to flashing genitalia in public. It gets madder. A Department for Education source said that teachers have the flexibility to teach pupils about abuses such as wolf whistling, saying, "We would certainly encourage teachers to take the curriculum and expand and reflect on events and movements in society. That's why the curriculum is built like that, so that people have the flexibility." Malthouse's comments echoed those of Theresa May, who called on Monday for more to be done in schools. She said, "If we are going to eradicate violence against women and girls, we need a change of attitude that is about dealing with perpetrators, changing their behaviour, but also teaching young men and boys about respect for women and about what is or is not acceptable in a relationship." Okay, so a few things here. One, wolf whistling is cringe, but from what I can tell, it's only really feminists that hate it, and those that don't appreciate it will just ignore the men. But then there's a bunch of feminists who write about how wolf whistling is the worst thing to ever happen to them because they have such easy lives, and then 10 years later write an article saying that they miss being wolf whistled. And either way, I don't see how wolf whistling leads to violence against women. It seems to be one of those things that some women don't like, so lump it in with the rest of the sexual harassment umbrella, which I don't think is the right way to go about it. But also, apparently men and boys have to be told what's acceptable in a relationship. That's between the two people in a relationship anyway. What's acceptable in a relationship with me and my female friends would not be the same as the things that are acceptable in a relationship between me and a girlfriend of mine. So ultimately, again, it seems like this top-down view of the world where the state and the institutions have to teach men and boys how to respect women, when really, throughout history, it has been a negotiation between, if we're going to group them together, men and women, but ultimately it's a negotiation between individuals. One of the actual main issues with women being attacked is alcohol, but no one ever seems to bring this up in these debates. They always seem to want to accuse men and boys of not respecting women, which I'm sorry, I just don't see in my daily life. And I recall a story when I was jogging with a female friend. She actually got wolf whistled by some construction workers, and she just made a joke about it, saying, "Oh, they're wolf whistling you, Haryan." And she was laughing about it. She knew that they were wolf whistling her, she didn't care though. So again, in this case, she doesn't feel disrespected or anything like that. And yet some people do, and this is what I mean by relationships are essentially a negotiation between individuals. So I don't think any policy on this that comes from Parliament can fix this. I think people will essentially just ignore it, and I think it's a waste of time and money. But no doubt it will go through anyway. So I suppose it's a good idea to move on to the police's perspective from all these incidents. "We can't win," says West Midlands Police Chief after protest crackdown. And believe it or not, I think I agree with him. One of the country's most senior police chiefs have urged the government to relax restrictions on protests, saying that police could not win when it comes to enforcement at events. Sir David Thompson, the Chief Constable of the West Midlands Police, said officers were unfairly criticised for being either too woke or over-tolerant, or cracking down too hard. Well, to be fair, this might be my bias coming out, but I'd say they are not being unfairly criticised for being too woke, but I do think they are fairly being criticised for cracking down too hard. Thompson, whose force is the third biggest in England, said the current regulations should be quickly realigned, adding that a rethink was needed before the end of the lockdown rules in June. So at least I have finally found a police chief who seems to agree that the lockdown rules need to be loosened, even if it is specifically just for protests. I mean, they'll do it for everything else along with protests, I think. Whether Parliament will take his advice on board is another matter, though. But we have one final article to go through, because it's mental. Sarah Everard, search officer, sent meme about violence against women. Yes, we have this thing of illegal memes again. A Metropolitan Police officer involved in the Sarah Everard search operation allegedly sent his colleague a graphic internet meme about violence against women. The Independent Officer of Police Conduct announced it would investigate the probationary constable after he shared material on WhatsApp and was reported by colleagues. Yes, if you're going to send spicy memes, I really wouldn't send it to anyone you work with. You are more than likely going to get investigated and fired. It is one of a string of referrals sent by the Met to the independent watchdog. So police aren't even allowed to share memes in their private chats. It's crazy. So we are coming to the final section I want to cover, which is the Shadow Education Secretary, i.e. a woman who left school at 16, Angela Rayner, who is a Labour MP, of course, as she's part of the Shadow Cabinet, and she has sent out a few tweets that I just wanted to go through. So, first is this tweet. Under the Tories, rape has effectively been decriminalised, and she puts this fancy graphic up, basically saying there have been 55,000 rapes reported to the police from March 2019 to March 2020, and out of that, there were 1,867 rapes that were charged. Of course, we all know the phrase, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And it is also worth pointing out that this does not include a bar for the amount of rape reports that were investigated and turned up negative. And also, quite clearly, rape is not effectively legalised, as people are quite clearly being charged for rape. It's just using a singular statistic, as the left usually do, to try and make a point that they can't make while being honest. So her second tweet says, "You don't protect women by silencing us and curtailing our right to protest," which they weren't doing because you were women, they were doing it because of the COVID lockdown. "You don't protect women by harsher penalties for attacking a statue than raping a woman," and we'll get into that in a minute. "The Tories' crime bill does not even mention women, and it will not do anything to protect us. We are voting against it. 300 pages of the Tories' crime bill, not a single mention of the word woman." Yes, Angela Rayner seems to have it in her head that for some reason, if you don't mention women, but you don't mention men either, and instead mention people in general will be protected, that does indeed include women, and they will have the protections that they ask for, such as assault and all that. Which, by the way, they already have. We already have crimes against everything they're asking for, apart from, of course, wolf whistling. But as I keep going through, they don't really want to put an end to wolf whistling. But we're not really supposed to say that, but here we are. Anyway, on to the final tweet of Angela's. "The Tories talk tough on crime, but their bill does nothing to protect women. It doesn't increase sentences for rapists, it doesn't make street harassment a crime, and won't fast-track rape cases through the courts so victims get justice." And then, again, another graphic. "Doesn't increase minimum sentences for rapists and stalkers, doesn't make street harassment a crime, doesn't fast-track rape or serious sexual assault cases, but does include a higher sentence for damaging a statue than the minimum sentence for rape." Now, believe it or not, this is a lie. I know, a Labour MP lying. Can you believe it? So the only part of this bill that even mentions criminal damage to anything is this part, section 46, criminal damage to memorials, mode of trial. So this part says, in Schedule 2 of Magistrates' Court Act 1980, in paragraph 1, in the first column, for the words, "from any offence to the end," substitute "any offence committed by destroying or damaging property by fire," and "any offence committed by destroying or damaging a memorial." And then section 2 essentially clarifies what this means. It says, "A memorial is a building or other structure, or any other thing erected or installed on land, or in any other building or structure on land, or a garden or any other thing planted or grown on land, which has a commemorative purpose." So this is essentially more war memorials, it's gravestones, it's bunches of flowers put down for memorials to anyone. It's not even war memorials, it could be a memorial for Sarah Everard. It goes on, "For the purposes of that paragraph, any movable thing, such as flowers, which is left in or on or at a memorial within the meaning of subsection 11a, the one we just went through, has or can reasonably be assumed to have a commemorative purpose, is also regarded as a memorial." And the amendment goes on, "For the purposes of subsection 11a and 11b, references to a building or structure include a reference to part of a building or part of a structure, as the case may be, and something has a commemorative purpose if at least one of the purposes is to commemorate one or more individuals or animals, or a particular description of individuals or animals, or an event or series of events." And finally, 11d basically says it doesn't matter if this is commemorating someone or something that is living or dead, or is capable of even being identified. So memorials to the unknown soldier still are affected under these amendments. And finally, part 3, the amendments made by this section do not apply in relation to offences committed before it comes into force. So basically this isn't a retroactively applied law. So you might be wondering, what the hell does all this have to do with anything? Well, essentially, before this bill has been put forward, the punishment for these crimes was based on how much they were worth. The idea of this bill is to take away from the monetary value of memorials and instead make it apply equally as it is a memorial, and on a emotional and moral level even, it should all be applied in the same way. So that means that any criminal damage to a memorial, and this does include statues but isn't every statue, is now pushed up to a maximum of 10 years jail sentence. So this is only technically changing the maximum jail sentence for memorials that cost less than, I believe, £50,000 was the minimum value for which you could prosecute someone for 10 years in jail. Now it just makes it 10 years for any memorial, even if it's a bunch of flowers. So that is the first disingenuous part. So while Angela Rayner's original claim was that this bill does include a higher sentence for damaging a statue than a minimum sentence for rape, that's very disingenuous. So, for reference, a big narrative in British feminist circles is that you have an average of 5-year jail sentence for rape, and that's just not true at all. According to Full Fact, the starting point in that document is far from the whole story, i.e. the document that says the average sentence for rape in Britain is 5 years. Looking at the Crown Prosecution Service's summary of rape sentencing guidelines shows it is the lowest possible starting point applied only for a single offence of rape by a single offender where the victim is over 16. So 5 years in jail is the minimum jail sentence for anyone who has raped an adult. And even in that scenario, the sentencing range is given as 4 to 8 years. So it can go up to 8 years. And yes, you can get up to 8 years for desecrating a memorial of any description. However, as I said, that is just for a single case of rape. For repeated rape of one victim over time or of multiple victims, the starting point is 15 years and the range is 13 to 19 years. So, no. This is what I mean by disingenuous. Does it include a higher sentence for damaging a statue than the minimum sentence for rape? Yes, technically, but they are going off the 5-year sentence. And let's be real here. A maximum sentence for rape is still higher than the maximum sentence for criminal damage, which will rarely be given out. So it is a moot point anyway. It is trying to rile up the feminists in a very disingenuous way. And believably, it's unfortunately probably going to work. But anyway, I also want to mention that bill does also include expanding police powers to crack down on protests. It wants to enable start and finish times, have noise pollution as a reason to shut down an event and things like this. And generally, I don't want to go through this because the load seaters are probably going through it, but I don't agree that the police need to crack down on them any more than they are now. I think it needs to be loosened first, and then maybe you can look into issues like that. But for now, I just don't do it. And the worst part about all this is that people like Jess Phillips and Angela Rayner are just going to keep on lying to keep their narrative going, to keep getting into law things that will help what's the world that they have created in their head, essentially, that many rapists get away with their crimes, which they don't, and that the impossible task of walking alone in a dark street at night is ever going to be safe. You can have as many deterrent and protections as you want. You can be as vigilant as you want. The fact of the matter is that there are some despicable men out there, and women mind, but let's be fair, it is mostly men, who are going to commit crimes and kill people. And no matter how much you tell men and boys to respect women, that is never, ever the issue. The issue is deranged men who are more than likely either out of their mind or psychopathic, who basically just want to kill women. Just look at the Yorkshire Ripper. What was his incentive to do all those horrible things to women? The answer is, he was just a mentalist. And there's not much we can do about those people, apart from give them the help and hope that they are cured of their sickness, which it usually is, before they can do anything terrible. And if it's impossible to cure them, they simply just have to be locked up forever. It's the only way to do it. Unless you agree that capital punishment is a reasonable option, but I personally do not. But that's a different subject. So, to conclude, one woman dies, it's a terrible tragedy, it should never have happened. I hope the guy who murdered her gets what's coming to him. But trying to change this individual action from this sick fuck into a societal problem is beyond ridiculous. But unfortunately, it does play right into the feminist victim narrative. So we're going to see this for quite a while in the UK, I think. There is no way this is going to be my last video on this. This is going to be the topic of conversation for MPs, feminists, and the like for some years, I think. That's just the way of the world at the moment, but that's also everything I've got for you at the moment. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.